You know, most people think that democracy protects those who speak truth to power, that elected officials are safe from retaliation when they expose government wrongdoing. What a beautiful and tragic illusion that is. It took Congressman Robert Bob McKenzie and a manila folder containing the most dangerous secrets in American military history to completely shatter that illusion and reveal a truth that most of us spend our entire lives avoiding. My name is Marcus. You're watching Razor Edge. Before we dive into this powerful story, I need to ask you something important. If these impactful military stories resonate with you, please consider subscribing to Razor Edge and hitting the notification bell. This ensures you never miss our deeply revealing narratives, and it really helps us continue sharing these transformative stories with you. Robert McKenzie was 45 years old when he received the folder that would seal his fate. It was June 15, 1971, and he was sitting in his modest congressional office in the Rayburn Building, looking at photocopied documents that should never have existed outside the Pentagon's most secure vaults. The manila folder bore no markings, no classification stamps, nothing to indicate that its contents could topple a presidency and cost him his life. Bob McKenzie wasn't your typical politician. Born in Southie, Boston in 1926, he had enlisted in the Army Air Corps at 17, lying about his age to fight the Nazis. By 19, he was flying B-17 bombing missions over Germany, watching friends die in flaming metal coffins 30,000 feet above enemy territory. He earned the Distinguished Flying Cross after his bomber was shot down over occupied France, and he spent 3 months with the French resistance, helping downed Allied airmen escape through underground networks. When he returned home, McKenzie could have leveraged his war hero status into a comfortable corporate career. Instead, he used the GI Bill to study law at Harvard, then returned to his working-class neighborhood to represent the forgotten families of Boston. He won his congressional seat in 1962 on a platform of government accountability and veterans' rights. By 1971, he had built a reputation as the congressman who actually read every bill, who asked the uncomfortable questions, who never forgot where he came from. That reputation made him the perfect target for Daniel Ellsberg's most dangerous revelation. Ellsberg, a former Pentagon analyst turned whistleblower, had already leaked portions of what would become known as the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times. But what he handed McKenzie that June afternoon was different. These weren't just documents proving that 4 presidents had systematically lied about Vietnam. These were operational orders detailing illegal bombing campaigns in neutral Cambodia, assassination programs targeting civilian leaders, and chemical weapons testing on American soldiers without their knowledge. McKenzie spread the documents across his desk with the same methodical precision he had once used to plot bombing runs over Nazi Germany. His hands, still steady despite the tremor that had developed since his war injuries, traced lines of text that revealed a shadow war being fought with no congressional oversight, no public accountability, and no regard for international law. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, reading an operational directive authorizing the elimination of Cambodian village leaders suspected of supporting the Viet Cong. The document bore the signature of a general who had testified before McKenzie's subcommittee just 2 weeks earlier, swearing under oath that no American forces were operating in Cambodia. But it was the final document in the folder that made McKenzie's blood run cold. Stamped Eyes Only, Presidential Authorization, it detailed something called Operation Phoenix Expansion, a program to neutralize anti-war leaders within the United States itself. The target list included journalists, professors, and 3 sitting members of Congress who had been particularly troublesome in their opposition to Southeast Asian operations. McKenzie's name wasn't on the list yet, but he knew it soon would be. He had fought Nazis. He had survived being shot down behind enemy lines. He had spent decades fighting for the working families of Massachusetts against corporate interests and political corruption. But nothing had prepared him for the realization that his own government was operating like the totalitarian regimes he had risked his life to defeat. McKenzie locked the documents in his office safe and walked to the window overlooking the Capitol dome. The summer sun was setting, casting long shadows across the marble steps where tourists posed for pictures, blissfully unaware that their democracy was being dismantled in classified conference rooms by men who had forgotten their oaths to the Constitution. He thought about his wife, Margaret, waiting for him at their modest home in Arlington. He thought about his daughter, Sarah, starting her junior year at Georgetown, proud to tell her friends that her father was one of the good guys in Congress. He thought about the 23-year-old soldiers dying in Vietnamese jungles while their government lied about why they were there. McKenzie had a choice to make. He could return the documents to Ellsberg, claim he had never seen them, and continue his career as a respected but ultimately powerless congressman. Or he could do what his conscience demanded, expose the truth, regardless of the consequences. That night, he called his chief of staff, Patricia Hoffman, a brilliant former prosecutor who had joined his team because she believed government could be a force for good. "Pat, I need you to clear my schedule for next week. We're going to hold hearings that will change everything." "What kind of hearings, Congressman?" McKenzie stared at the safe containing the documents that would either restore American democracy or destroy him. The kind that remind people what this country is supposed to stand for. What McKenzie didn't know was that his phone had been tapped for 3 weeks. Every word of his conversation with Patricia Hoffman was being recorded by NSA technicians and transmitted directly to a windowless room in the White House basement, where men with no names and unlimited authority were already planning his elimination. The congressman who had survived Nazi fighters and French winters was about to face an enemy far more dangerous than any he had encountered in war. His own government, armed with the full resources of the American intelligence apparatus, and a president willing to authorize murder to protect his secrets. In 72 hours, Operation Silent Patriot would be approved at the highest levels of government. McKenzie's fate would be sealed not by enemy action, but by a presidential signature on a death warrant disguised as a national security directive. The war hero who had dedicated his life to serving his country was about to discover that sometimes the greatest act of patriotism is dying for the truth. But first, he had to survive long enough to tell it. The Oval Office had never felt smaller to President Richard Nixon than it did on the morning of June 18, 1971. 3 days had passed since Congressman McKenzie's phone call had been intercepted, and the most powerful man in the free world was pacing behind the resolute desk like a caged animal, his face flushed with the rage that his inner circle had learned to fear. "That son of a bitch is going to destroy everything," Nixon growled, jabbing his finger at the transcript of McKenzie's conversation. "Everything we've built, everything we've accomplished in Southeast Asia, gone because some bleeding-heart war hero thinks he can play judge and jury with classified operations." Seated around the president were the architects of America's shadow war. Henry Kissinger, his face a mask of calculated concern, CIA Director Richard Helms, methodically cleaning his glasses with the precision of a man who had orchestrated coups in 3 countries, and General Alexander Haig, whose military bearing couldn't hide the cold pragmatism that had made him indispensable to this administration. "Mr. President," Kissinger began in his distinctive accent, "we must consider all options. McKenzie isn't some fringe radical we can discredit. He's a decorated war hero with impeccable credentials and enough credibility to bring down this administration if he goes public with those documents." Nixon stopped pacing and fixed his pale blue eyes on the men who had helped him reshape American foreign policy through methods that would have horrified the Founding Fathers. "I didn't claw my way to this office to be destroyed by some Boy Scout congressman who thinks the American people deserve to know how we really fight wars. The Phoenix program has eliminated over 20,000 Viet Cong operatives. Our Cambodia operations have disrupted enemy supply lines that would have cost thousands of American lives. And our domestic surveillance has prevented God knows how many security breaches. The problem, sir," Director Helms interjected, "is that McKenzie has documentation proving all of it. If he holds those hearings, we won't just lose public support for the war. We'll face congressional investigations, international tribunals, possibly even impeachment proceedings." The word impeachment hung in the air like a death sentence. Nixon's jaw tightened as he considered the implications. He had spent his entire political career fighting for this moment, this chance to reshape America's role in the world. He wouldn't let it be destroyed by one man's misguided sense of moral superiority. "What are our options?" Nixon asked, his voice dropping to the whisper that his staff had learned meant someone's fate was being decided. General Haig opened a leather portfolio and extracted a single sheet of paper marked with the highest classification level in the American intelligence community. "We've developed contingency plans for situations exactly like this, Mr. President. Operation Silent Patriot is designed to neutralize domestic threats to ongoing classified operations while maintaining complete deniability." "Neutralize," Nixon repeated, savoring the euphemism. "Explain." Haig's military training had taught him to deliver bad news with clinical precision. Congressman McKenzie maintains a regular travel schedule between Washington and his district in Massachusetts. He frequently uses military transport, given his status as a member of the Armed Services Committee. We have assets within Air Force logistics who can ensure that his next flight encounters mechanical difficulties. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock that had witnessed countless presidential decisions, most of them recorded for history. This conversation would never appear in any official record. "You're talking about assassination," Kissinger said quietly, though his tone suggested calculation rather than moral objection. "We're talking about protecting national security," Haig corrected. "McKenzie's actions constitute a clear and present danger to ongoing military operations. American soldiers are dying in Southeast Asia while he plays politics with classified intelligence. Sometimes the greater good requires difficult decisions." Nixon walked to the window overlooking the Rose Garden, where tourists were taking pictures, blissfully unaware that their democracy was being redefined 30 feet away. He thought about the secret bombing campaigns that had crippled North Vietnamese supply lines, the assassination programs that had eliminated enemy leadership, the surveillance operations that had prevented domestic terrorism. All of it necessary, all of it effective, all of it threatened by one man's naive belief in government transparency. "What about collateral damage?" Nixon asked without turning around. "Minimal," Haig replied, consulting his notes. "McKenzie typically travels with 2 staff members and uses Air Force pilots cleared for congressional transport. All personnel involved would be considered acceptable losses in the interest of operational security." Director Helms leaned forward, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had orchestrated the deaths of foreign leaders with the same casual efficiency most people brought to ordering lunch. "Mr. President, we have a 48-hour window. Our intelligence indicates that McKenzie plans to announce his hearings on Monday morning. Once he goes public, elimination becomes exponentially more difficult and infinitely more suspicious." Nixon turned back to face the men who had helped him wage secret wars across 3 continents. Each of them had blood on their hands. Each of them understood that democracy was a luxury that couldn't always be afforded when national security was at stake. "How would it work?" Nixon asked, his voice barely audible. Haig opened his portfolio to reveal detailed schematics of a military transport aircraft. "McKenzie is scheduled to fly to Boston tomorrow evening for a weekend in his district. He'll be using a C-130 transport from Andrews Air Force Base, standard procedure for congressional travel. Our assets in Air Force maintenance have identified vulnerabilities in the hydraulic systems that could cause catastrophic failure during flight. The beauty of the operation," Director Helms added, "is its simplicity. Mechanical failure during routine transport. No evidence of sabotage. No investigation beyond standard accident protocols. McKenzie becomes a tragic footnote, a war hero who died serving his country, and the documents he possesses disappear with him." Nixon sat down behind the resolute desk, the same desk where Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation, where Roosevelt had planned D-Day, where Kennedy had navigated the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now it would witness the authorization of an American president ordering the murder of a sitting congressman. What about his staff? The documents? His chief of staff, Patricia Hoffman, will be traveling with him, Haig explained. She's the only other person who has seen the complete file. The documents themselves are in McKenzie's office safe, which our people can access during the confusion following the accident. Within 24 hours, all evidence of the Pentagon papers leak will be eliminated. Nixon picked up his pen, the same Mont Blanc fountain pen he had used to sign legislation affecting millions of Americans. His hand hovered over the authorization document as he considered the weight of what he was about to do. Mr. President, Kissinger said softly, history will judge us not by the methods we used, but by the results we achieved. Sometimes preserving democracy requires protecting it from those who would destroy it through misguided transparency. Nixon's pen touched the paper. In flowing script, he wrote his signature beneath the words, Presidential Authorization, Operation Silent Patriot, approved. The 47th President of the United States had just ordered the assassination of a sitting member of Congress. Gentlemen, Nixon said, capping his pen with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence, this conversation never happened. This document never existed. And by Sunday morning, Congressman Robert McKenzie will be nothing more than a tragic reminder that even war heroes aren't immune to the dangers of military service. As the three men filed out of the Oval Office, each carrying pieces of a murder plot that would remain classified for 40 years, Nixon remained seated behind his desk, staring at the empty authorization folder. He had saved American foreign policy. He had protected ongoing military operations. He had preserved the presidency itself. He had also just signed the death warrant of a man whose only crime was believing that the American people deserved to know the truth about their government. In 18 hours, Congressman Robert McKenzie would board a military transport aircraft, unaware that his own president had condemned him to death. The machinery of assassination was already in motion, and nothing could stop it now. Technical Sergeant Michael Wrench Rodriguez had been maintaining Air Force aircraft for 12 years, and he had never been asked to kill anyone. Until 3:47 a.m. on June 19, 1971, when a man in a civilian suit appeared at his quarters at Andrews Air Force Base with orders that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Sergeant Rodriguez, the man said, flashing credentials that identified him only as Defense Intelligence Agency. You've been selected for a classified maintenance operation. This comes directly from the Pentagon, and it requires your immediate attention. Rodriguez, a decorated Vietnam veteran who had kept countless aircraft flying under impossible conditions, followed the agent through the pre-dawn darkness to Hangar 7, where a C-130 Hercules transport sat under harsh fluorescent lights. The aircraft bore the standard markings of Congressional Transport Services, its gray paint scheme designed for functionality rather than aesthetics. This aircraft is scheduled for a routine congressional transport mission tomorrow evening, the agent explained, his voice carrying the flat authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. However, there's been a security concern regarding the passenger. We need you to install a safety modification. Rodriguez had worked on classified aircraft modifications before. Spy planes, special operations transports, even experimental weapons systems. But something about this assignment felt different. Wrong. What kind of modification, sir? The agent handed him a technical manual that Rodriguez had never seen before, despite his extensive training on C-130 systems. The document detailed a procedure for installing a remote-controlled valve in the aircraft's hydraulic system, disguised as a standard pressure relief component. This device, the agent explained, pointing to a schematic, can be activated by radio signal to create a catastrophic hydraulic failure. The aircraft will lose all flight control surfaces within 90 seconds of activation. To any accident investigator, it will appear as a standard mechanical failure. Rodriguez stared at the manual, his hands trembling slightly as the implications became clear. Sir, you're asking me to sabotage an aircraft. This will kill everyone on board. Sergeant, You swore an oath to follow orders and protect national security. The passenger on tomorrow's flight poses a direct threat to ongoing military operations. American soldiers are dying because of his actions. This modification will save more lives than it costs. The agent's words carried the weight of absolute authority, but Rodriguez's conscience rebelled against what he was being asked to do. He thought about his own son, barely 18 and preparing to ship out to Vietnam. He thought about the pilots who trusted him to keep their aircraft airworthy. He thought about the oath he had taken to defend the Constitution. "I need to see written authorization for this, sir." The agent's expression hardened. "Sergeant, this operation is classified at the highest levels. Written authorization would compromise operational security. You have verbal orders from the Pentagon, and that's sufficient. With respect, sir, I can't sabotage an aircraft without proper documentation. If something goes wrong..." "If you refuse this order," the agent interrupted, "you'll be charged with insubordination and treason. Your security clearance will be revoked, your military career will be over, and your family will lose all benefits. Is that what you want for your wife and son?" Rodriguez felt the walls closing in around him. He had seen what happened to military personnel who crossed the intelligence community. Careers destroyed, families ruined, lives shattered by bureaucratic retaliation. But he had also seen what happened when good people followed evil orders. "How long do I have?" he asked quietly. "The modification must be completed by 1800 hours tomorrow. The aircraft departs at 1900 hours with Congressman McKenzie and his staff aboard." As the agent walked away, leaving Rodriguez alone with the technical manual and his conscience, the sergeant understood that he was trapped between two impossible choices: betray his oath to protect innocent lives, or destroy his family's future by refusing to follow orders. He began working on the hydraulic system at 0400 hours, his hands moving with the mechanical precision of 12 years' experience while his mind wrestled with the moral implications of what he was doing. The modification was elegant in its simplicity, a small valve that could be remotely triggered to dump all hydraulic fluid from the aircraft's control systems. To any investigator, it would look like a standard component failure. By noon, the sabotage was complete. Rodriguez had installed a device that would turn a routine congressional transport into a flying coffin, and no one would ever know it wasn't an accident. Meanwhile, 60 miles away in his congressional office, Robert McKenzie was preparing for what he believed would be a routine weekend trip to his district. He had spent the morning reviewing his notes for Monday's press conference, where he planned to announce the most explosive congressional hearings in American history. "Pat," he called to his chief of staff, "make sure you pack copies of all the documents. I want to review them one more time during the flight." Patricia Hoffman, a brilliant lawyer who had sacrificed a lucrative private practice to serve the public good, was carefully organizing the Pentagon Papers evidence that would expose decades of government lies. She had no idea that her dedication to transparency had already signed her death warrant. "Congressman, are you sure about this? Once we go public, there's no going back. The administration will use every resource they have to destroy us." McKenzie looked up from the documents that detailed illegal bombing campaigns, assassination programs, and domestic surveillance operations. "Pat, I didn't survive being shot down over Nazi Germany to come home and watch my own government become everything we fought against. If we don't expose this now, who will?" At 1700 hours, McKenzie and Hoffman arrived at Andrews Air Force Base for their routine flight to Boston. The C-130 sat on the tarmac like a gray metal coffin, its engines already running as ground crew completed final preparations. Captain James "Hawk" Morrison, the pilot assigned to the flight, was a 15-year Air Force veteran who had flown transport missions in 3 combat zones. He had no idea that his aircraft had been sabotaged or that he had been selected for this mission because his military record showed unwavering loyalty and an unfortunate tendency to follow orders without question. "Good evening, Congressman," Morrison said as McKenzie and Hoffman boarded the aircraft. "We've got clear weather all the way to Boston. Should be a smooth flight." McKenzie settled into his seat and opened his briefcase. pulling out the documents that would either restore American democracy or die with him in a fiery crash. As the C-130 taxied toward the runway, he had no idea that Technical Sergeant Rodriguez was watching from Hangar 7, tears streaming down his face as he realized he had just murdered 4 innocent people. The aircraft lifted off at exactly 1900 hours, climbing into the darkening sky over Maryland. In the passenger compartment, McKenzie reviewed his evidence while Hoffman organized their presentation materials. In the cockpit, Captain Morrison monitored his instruments, unaware that hidden in his hydraulic system was a device that would kill them all. And in a windowless room beneath the White House, a CIA technician sat before a radio transmitter, waiting for orders to activate the device that would eliminate the greatest threat to presidential power since the Civil War. The flight plan called for a 2-hour journey to Boston's Logan Airport, but McKenzie's aircraft would never reach its destination. At 20:47 hours, exactly 1 hour and 47 minutes into the flight, the technician received a coded message. "Silent Patriot is authorized. Execute immediately." His finger hovered over the transmission button that would send a radio signal to the sabotaged hydraulic valve. One press of that button would dump all hydraulic fluid from the aircraft's control systems, leaving Captain Morrison helpless to prevent a catastrophic crash. The technician thought about the oath he had taken to defend the Constitution. Then he thought about the orders he had received from the highest levels of government. He pressed the button. 37,000 feet above the Appalachian Mountains, Congressman Robert McKenzie was about to discover that sometimes the price of truth is paid in blood. And the war hero who had survived Nazi fighters was about to be killed by his own government, using the same military he had served with honor for over 2 decades. At exactly 20:47 hours and 37 seconds, Captain James Morrison felt his C-130 Hercules shudder in a way that no aircraft should ever shudder. The first indication of catastrophe came through his hands, a subtle change in the control stick's response that triggered every survival instinct he had developed through 15 years of military flying. "What the hell?" Morrison muttered, scanning his instrument panel as warning lights began illuminating like a deadly Christmas tree. Hydraulic pressure gauges that had shown normal readings seconds earlier were now plummeting towards 0 across all 3 independent systems. In the passenger compartment, Congressman McKenzie looked up from the Pentagon papers as the aircraft's smooth flight suddenly became turbulent. "Pat, did you feel that?" Patricia Hoffman, who had been organizing documents for Monday's press conference, gripped her armrest as the C-130 lurched violently to the left. "Something's wrong with the plane." Morrison's training kicked in as he realized the magnitude of their crisis. Total hydraulic failure in a C-130 was supposed to be impossible. The aircraft had 3 independent systems specifically designed to prevent this scenario, but his instruments were telling him the impossible had just happened. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," Morrison transmitted over the emergency frequency. "Air Force Transport 749 declaring emergency. Total hydraulic failure at flight level 370, requesting immediate vectors to nearest suitable airport." The response from Washington Center came back immediately. "Transport 749, roger your mayday. Nearest suitable airport is Martinsburg Regional, bearing 09043 miles. Descend and maintain flight level 250. Morrison attempted to bank toward Martinsburg, but his control stick felt like it was connected to nothing. The massive transport aircraft was now flying on momentum alone, its control surfaces locked in whatever position they had been in when the hydraulic systems failed. "Sir," Morrison called back to McKenzie, his voice maintaining the professional calm that military pilots learn to project even when death is imminent, "we're experiencing mechanical difficulties. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and prepare for emergency procedures." McKenzie had heard that tone before, during his bomber missions over Germany, when pilots tried to keep their crews calm while their aircraft disintegrated around them. He knew they were going to die. "Pat," he said quietly, grabbing her hand, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. This isn't an accident." Hoffman stared at him in confusion as the aircraft continued its uncontrolled descent. What do you mean? The timing is too perfect. 3 days after we discover evidence of illegal government operations, our plane suffers catastrophic mechanical failure. They're trying to kill us, Pat. They're trying to bury the truth with our bodies. In the cockpit, Morrison was fighting a losing battle against physics and sabotage. He had managed to reduce their rate of descent by adjusting engine power, but without hydraulic controls, he couldn't change their heading or level off. The C-130 was essentially a 70,000-pound glider with the aerodynamic characteristics of a flying brick. Washington Center, Transport 749, Morrison transmitted, his voice beginning to crack under the strain. Unable to maintain heading or altitude, we're in an uncontrolled descent. Estimate impact in approximately 8 minutes. The response from air traffic control carried the weight of helplessness. Transport 749 understood. Emergency services are being notified. Maintain present heading if possible. Morrison almost laughed at the absurdity of that instruction. Maintain heading? He couldn't maintain anything. The aircraft was descending at 1,200 feet per minute toward the Appalachian Mountains, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. In the passenger compartment, McKenzie was frantically writing on a legal pad, his handwriting becoming increasingly erratic as the aircraft shook violently. Pat, if we don't survive this, someone needs to know what we discovered. Someone needs to continue the investigation. Bob, what are you doing? Writing down everything. The Phoenix program, the Cambodia operations, the domestic surveillance. If they recover our bodies, maybe they'll find this note. Maybe someone will ask the right questions. Hoffman watched her boss, a man she had come to respect as one of the few honest politicians in Washington, prepare for death with the same methodical precision he brought to congressional hearings. Even facing assassination, Robert McKenzie was thinking about his duty to the American people. Morrison's altimeter showed 15,000 feet and descending. Through his windscreen, he could see the dark silhouettes of mountains rising to meet them. He had perhaps 4 minutes before impact, and he was determined to use every second trying to save his passengers. Sir, he called back to McKenzie, I'm going to attempt a controlled crash landing. There's a valley ahead that might give us a chance. When I give the word, assume crash position and hold on. McKenzie finished writing his note and stuffed it into his jacket pocket. If his body survived the impact, maybe the truth would survive with it. He looked at Patricia Hoffman, a brilliant woman who had sacrificed everything to serve the public good, and felt the crushing weight of responsibility for her impending death. Pat, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I got you involved in this. I'm sorry your dedication to justice is going to cost you your life. Hoffman squeezed his hand with surprising strength. Bob, if we're going to die, at least we're dying for something that matters. How many people can say that? At 8,000 feet, Morrison could see individual trees on the mountainsides. The valley he had spotted was narrow and filled with obstacles, but it was their only chance. He began using differential engine power to try to line up with what looked like a small clearing. Brace for impact! Morrison shouted. 30 seconds! McKenzie and Hoffman assumed crash positions, their heads down, their hands locked together in a final gesture of human connection. In his pocket, McKenzie's handwritten summary of the Pentagon papers pressed against his chest like a final heartbeat. Morrison fought the controls with everything he had learned in 15 years of flying. He managed to reduce their forward speed slightly by pulling the engines to idle, but the aircraft was still descending at over 800 feet per minute when it hit the tree line. The first impact tore off the C-130's right wing, sending the aircraft into a violent spin. The second impact, with a rocky outcropping, crushed the cockpit and killed Morrison instantly. The third impact, with the valley floor, broke the aircraft into 3 pieces, and ignited the fuel tanks in a fireball that could be seen for 20 miles. Congressman Robert McKenzie died on impact, his body thrown from the wreckage, still clutching the documents that revealed his government's darkest secrets. Patricia Hoffman survived the initial crash, but died from her injuries before rescue teams could reach the remote crash site. The note McKenzie had written, detailing the Pentagon Papers evidence and his suspicions about the crash, was found 3 days later by investigators. It was immediately classified and disappeared into the same intelligence apparatus that had ordered his assassination. At 2156 hours, exactly 68 minutes after the sabotage device had been activated, Air Force Transport 7249 was officially declared destroyed with all hands lost. The preliminary investigation concluded that mechanical failure had caused the crash, and the case was closed within a week. In Washington, President Nixon received word of McKenzie's death while dining with foreign diplomats. He expressed appropriate sorrow at the loss of a dedicated public servant and war hero, then continued his dinner conversation about trade agreements. The Pentagon Papers evidence that McKenzie had planned to reveal died with him in the Appalachian Mountains. The illegal bombing campaigns continued. The assassination programs expanded. The domestic surveillance operations grew more sophisticated. And in a windowless room beneath the White House, a CIA technician destroyed the radio transmitter that had murdered 4 innocent Americans, then went home to his family as if nothing had happened. Operation Silent Patriot was complete. The threat to presidential power had been eliminated. The truth had been buried beneath tons of twisted metal and classified documents. But truth, like fire, has a way of surviving even the most determined attempts to extinguish it. And 40 years later, the real story of Congressman Robert McKenzie's assassination would finally emerge from the shadows, revealing the price that democracy pays when power becomes more important than principle. The war hero who had survived Nazi fighters had been killed by his own government, but his sacrifice would not be forgotten. The truth was coming, and when it arrived, it would shake the foundations of American democracy. For 39 years, Technical Sergeant Michael Wrench Rodriguez carried the weight of 4 murders on his conscience. Every night, he saw Congressman McKenzie's face in his dreams. Every morning, he woke up knowing he had helped assassinate a war hero whose only crime was believing in government accountability. Rodriguez had completed his military service in 1975, received an honorable discharge, and spent the next 4 decades working as a civilian aircraft mechanic in Phoenix, Arizona. He never spoke about Operation Silent Patriot. He never told his wife why he sometimes woke up screaming. He never explained to his children why he refused to fly on commercial aircraft or why he donated anonymously to veterans organizations every year on June 19th, the anniversary of McKenzie's murder. But in 2010, at the age of 68 and dying from lung cancer caused by decades of exposure to aircraft chemicals, Rodriguez made a decision that would finally expose the truth about one of the most shocking political assassinations in American history. "I can't take this to my grave," he told his son, Michael Jr., during what both men knew would be their final conversation. "I helped kill a congressman. I helped murder a war hero. And the American people deserve to know what their government is capable of doing." Rodriguez had kept meticulous records of Operation Silent Patriot, technical manuals, photographs of the sabotage device, even the original orders he had received from the Defense Intelligence Agency. For 39 years, these documents had been hidden in a safety deposit box in Phoenix, waiting for the day when Rodriguez found the courage to reveal the truth. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Michael Jr. asked, unable to process what his father was telling him. "In 1971, I was ordered to sabotage a congressional transport aircraft. I installed a device that caused the crash that killed Congressman Robert McKenzie and 3 other people. It wasn't an accident, son. It was murder, ordered by the President of the United States." Rodriguez died 3 days later, but not before giving his son detailed instructions about what to do with the evidence. "Take it to the Washington Post," he whispered with his final breath. "Tell them the truth about Silent Patriot." The documents that Rodriguez's son delivered to investigative journalist Sarah Chen in November 2010 represented the most explosive political revelation since Watergate. Chen, a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter who specialized in government accountability, initially thought she was dealing with the fantasies of a grieving son. But as she examined the technical manuals, the photographs, and the classified orders, she realized she was holding proof of a presidential assassination that had been covered up for 4 decades. "This changes everything we thought we knew about the Nixon administration," Chen told her editor after spending 3 weeks verifying Rodriguez's claims. "We're not just talking about political dirty tricks or campaign finance violations. We're talking about the President of the United States ordering the murder of a sitting congressman." The Washington Post's investigation, published in a series of articles beginning in January 2011, sent shockwaves through the American political establishment. The evidence was overwhelming: technical documentation of the sabotage device, photographs of the modified hydraulic system, classified orders bearing authentic Pentagon signatures, and corroborating testimony from other military personnel who had been involved in the cover-up. But Rodriguez's confession was only the beginning. His courage in revealing the truth inspired other participants in Operation Silent Patriot to come forward with their own pieces of the conspiracy. Former CIA operative James "Ghost" Patterson, now 74 and suffering from Alzheimer's disease, provided his family with a detailed written confession before his memory deteriorated completely. Patterson had been the technician who activated the radio transmitter that murdered McKenzie, and his confession included precise details about the White House basement facility where the assassination was coordinated. "I pressed the button that killed them," Patterson wrote in his confession. "I followed orders from the highest levels of government, and I murdered 4 innocent Americans. I've lived with this guilt for 40 years, and I want the world to know what really happened to Congressman McKenzie." The most damaging revelation came from an unexpected source: the personal diary of General Alexander Haig, discovered in his estate after his death in 2010. Haig had kept detailed records of his meetings with Nixon, including the June 18, 1971 Oval Office conference where Operation Silent Patriot was authorized. "The president was clear about his intentions," Haig wrote in his diary entry for that date. "McKenzie represented an existential threat to the administration's Southeast Asian operations. Nixon authorized his elimination with the same casual authority he might use to order lunch. I've participated in military operations across 3 continents, but I've never seen such cold-blooded calculation in the service of political survival." The diary entries provided a minute-by-minute account of how a sitting American president had ordered the assassination of a congressman, then covered up the crime for decades using the full resources of the federal intelligence apparatus. As the evidence mounted, former government officials who had remained silent for 40 years began speaking publicly about Operation Silent Patriot. Dr. Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers whistleblower who had originally provided McKenzie with the classified documents, confirmed that the congressman had been planning explosive hearings that would have exposed illegal military operations across Southeast Asia. "Bob McKenzie was going to reveal everything," Ellsberg told Sarah Chen in a televised interview. "The illegal bombing campaigns, the assassination programs, the domestic surveillance operations, all of it. His hearings would have ended the Vietnam War 2 years earlier and probably brought down the Nixon administration. That's why they killed him." The impact of these revelations on American democracy was profound. Congressional hearings were immediately convened to investigate the assassination and determine how many other accidents might have been political murders. The Senate Intelligence Committee launched a comprehensive review of all suspicious deaths involving government critics during the Nixon, Ford, and Carter administrations. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Patricia Hoffman's daughter, now a federal judge, spoke publicly about her mother's murder for the first time. "My mother believed that government service was the highest calling," Judge Elizabeth Hoffman said during congressional testimony. "She sacrificed a lucrative legal career to work for Congressman McKenzie because she believed that democracy required transparency and accountability. She died because she was helping to expose government crimes." Her murder wasn't just an attack on her. It was an attack on every American who believes that our government should serve the people, not the other way around. The revelations about Operation Silent Patriot forced a fundamental reconsideration of American democracy during the Cold War era. How many other critics had been silenced? How many other accidents had been assassinations? How many other truths had been buried beneath classified documents and presidential authority? The McKenzie assassination also revealed the courage required to expose government crimes. Rodriguez could have taken his secret to the grave. Patterson could have remained silent. Haig could have destroyed his diary. But each of them, in their final years, chose truth over complicity. "This is what real patriotism looks like," Sarah Chen wrote in her final article about Operation Silent Patriot. Not blind obedience to authority, but the courage to expose authority when it betrays the principles it claims to defend. Congressman McKenzie died because he believed the American people deserved to know the truth about their government. 40 years later, that truth has finally emerged, and it reminds us that democracy dies in darkness, but it can also be reborn in the light of revelation. Today, there is a memorial to Congressman Robert McKenzie in the Capitol Rotunda, honoring him as a war hero who gave his life defending American democracy against its greatest threat, the corruption of power itself. The inscription reads, "He survived enemy fire abroad only to fall to friendly fire at home." His sacrifice reminds us that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, especially against those who would destroy democracy in democracy's name. The truth about Operation Silent Patriot changed American politics forever. It established new oversight mechanisms for intelligence operations, strengthened congressional authority over military actions, and created legal protections for whistleblowers who expose government crimes. But most importantly, it honored the memory of a war hero who believed that democracy was worth dying for, and proved that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually find its way to the light. Congressman Robert McKenzie had been silenced by presidential power, but his voice, carried by the courage of those who finally chose conscience over complicity, would echo through history as a reminder that in America, no one, not even the president, is above the law. The war hero's final mission was complete. The truth had been revealed, and democracy, bloodied but unbroken, would survive to fight another day.